much for coming out this evening and braving the slick roads and the snow. I want to begin this evening by taking a look. I want to be very clear as we begin. I want to take a look at Luke chapter 14 there in your handout. If you need a handout, please raise your hand and we will get you one very quickly. I want to be very clear, though, here from the beginning. This event is not a religious event. It's not apologetic for the purpose of winning anyone to a religion of any sort. This event is strictly about a person. And people are very different than religions. And so I want to make sure we are all on the same page there. Mahatma Gandhi. How many know who Gandhi is? Let me see your hands this evening. Mahatma Gandhi made an interesting statement. He said, I like your Christ. I do not like your, what does it say? You talk to me.
Christians.
Your Christians. Your Christians are so, what does he say there? Unlike your Christ. It's amazing to me that in today's culture, most people don't want to have anything to do with the person on the screen here. Not because they've had some bad experience with a heathen. Do you know what I mean by that? It's because they've had a bad experience with someone who claims to be following this person. Let me ask for a raise of hands. Is there anyone here tonight that's ever had a negative experience with a Christian before? Be honest, anyone here? I think if you look around, that's a lot of hands. And so I just want all of you to know you're at home here this evening. We all know what that feels like. And I want to make sure you understand very clearly. This is, once again, not about arguing in favor of a religion. It's about this person. In Luke 14, Jesus begins telling this story. It's actually a story that happened to him. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully, what does that say? Now, I know you are Canadian and I'm from the States. Matter of fact, I'm from a certain part in the States called the South. Do you know what that means? That means when I'm talking to you, I'm expecting you also to be what? Talking to me. That's right. These are not rhetorical questions. And Rich is going to go very quickly if he'll talk back to me. So I'm going to ask you questions as we go through this. And then you just speak up as I ask those questions. It says he was being carefully what? Watched. Being carefully watched. It says there in front of him was a man suffering from an abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and the experts in the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? What would their answer have been on their Jewish Sabbath? What would it have been? No, that was unlawful. But they remained silent, it says. Now it's interesting, they remained silent because remember, he was carefully being what? Watched. Now let's back up for just a second. Whose house is he at? Talk to me. Whose house is he at?
Pharisees?
He's at the Pharisees' house. He's there for a luncheon. Now the Pharisees would have been the religious, wealthy elite of that day. He's there at a lunch and there's only the Pharisees, Jesus, and this guy who's sick. And it's the Sabbath. And Jesus is being carefully what? Watched. What do you think they're watching to see if he'll do or not? What are they watching for?
Breaking the Sabbath.
Talk to me. What are they watching for? Is Jesus going to heal this man on their Sabbath? Notice what it says. Then he asked them, if one of you has a child, and I can imagine Jesus saying, no, let's go one step further, or even an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will he not immediately, what does that say? Pull it out? And they had nothing to say. Why are they remaining so silent? Why are they not answering his questions? It's almost very familiar to this evening. Why are they not answering his questions? They want to see what he is going to do of his own full volition. It says, and they had nothing to say. Then Jesus said to his host, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers, or sisters, or relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back so that you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the, what does it say?
Poor.
The poor. The, what does it say? The crippled. Whom else? And the, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. What is the only reason why this man with the abnormal swelling, what's the only reason he's there at this lunch? Talk to me. What's the only reason he's there? Talk to me. No, they don't have him there to be healed.
To trap Jesus.
No, this is a lunch at the Pharisees' house now. Think about the picture. You got a bunch of Pharisees, you got Jesus, and you got this sick dude. And the sick dude's there only by invitation. He didn't come up, it's at someone's house. Do you catch this? What's his purpose there? He is what you would call, where I'm from, he is the what? The bait. That's right. He's the bait. Actually, we're not going to finish this story, that part of the story, but it's amazing to me. It touches my heart that in a religious environment where people's religious rules meant more than the needs of people, what did Jesus always choose in every story? The needs of people. It actually says in the story, you can go back and look at it later tonight when you're at home, it actually says that Jesus went over and wraps his arms around this man, feeling compassion for him, and heals him and sends him on his way. And all the Pharisees are aghast. And Jesus doesn't even pay attention to it. He just, full steam ahead, says, when you invite a lunch, when you make a lunch, when you give a lunch, don't invite your friends, your other fellow religious wealthy people. Invite the, what did he say? The poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Why? Now, this is a very different culture back then. Now, I want to make sure we understand this too. When we think of the poor and the blind and the crippled and the lame in our culture today, that's much more like thinking of having compassion on those who are less fortunate. If you agree with that tonight, say yes.
Yes. Yep.
It's about looking at those, and there's a sense of, life didn't treat them as well as it's treated me, maybe. That's not how it worked in that day, in that culture. You see, this culture was built on an Old Testament paradigm that said if you obeyed God, God would what? If you disobeyed God, God would what? So if someone's poor, if someone's blind, if someone's crippled, if someone's lame, in their worldview, what was it saying about that person? They were a sinner. You see, we look at the poor, the blind, and the crippled, and we feel, oh, they're less fortunate. They would look at the poor, the blind, and the crippled, and they would feel morally superior to those people, as if they were somehow holier than those people. Now, I know that Christians wouldn't do that today, right? Christians would never feel morally superior to others. Am I right? Right? Let me ask you for a raise of hands. Is there anyone here that's ever had an experience with a Christian, someone who claimed to follow this person, who you felt as if they thought they were superior to you in some way or another? Yeah. So once again, if you look around and look at those hands, you're quite at home here this evening. This is what Jesus is referring to, these very things that we've already mentioned. He's saying when you give a lunch, invite those you think are morally inferior to you. Invite the sinners. Who you ate with in that culture, this was your tribe. This was your people. This was the people that you associated with. It goes on. When Jesus says you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous, it says when one of those at the table with him heard this, he said, blessed are those who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God. Now, what do you think that Pharisee's trying to do? Is the tension pretty thick in the room right now? Has Jesus just healed a man on the Sabbath? Has he sprung the trap? Has he condemned them for feeling morally superior to these whom they judge as worse sinners than themselves? Can you imagine what the state of the room is in? Is there a level of stress and tension among all of these Pharisees and Jesus over this lunch? And so Jesus is giving this, and finally, one of the Pharisees there trying to, I think, and I submit to you, he's trying to break the ice, trying to break the tension. And he says, blessed are those who will eat at the feast, at the banquet, talking about luncheons, they'll eat at the banquet in the kingdom of God. And I love the fact that he's trying to be a peacemaker here, but I also love the fact that Jesus says, okay, you want to talk about that? All right, we'll go there. If that's really where you want to take this, notice what Jesus does next. Jesus replied, and this was the great storyteller Jesus. A certain man was preparing a great, what does it say? Banquet. And he invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, come, for everything is now, what does it say? Everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, I have just bought a, what does that say? I must go and see it. Please excuse me. Another said, I have just bought, what is that? 5 yoke of oxen. And I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Still another said, I just got, what does that say? Married, so I can't come. Now, at first glance, these look legitimate. But when you look at them, there's something suspect about them. What does the first guy say? What's the first guy's excuse? Talk to me. Talk to me. Don't you do due diligence on a property before you purchase it? What does it mean, I just bought it, now I got to go check it out? Anybody think that's a little suspicious? Anybody here? Let me see your hands. Anybody think it's a little suspicious? All right, now look at it again. The next one says, I've just bought what? Don't you test drive a car before you purchase it? Don't you? I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen. I've got to try them out. And then the third one, what does he say? That one I understand. That one I get, so I can't come. I get that one fully. But the other two sound a little suspicious to me. So it says the servant here, the servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became, what emotion? Angry. And he ordered his servant, and this is so key, go out quickly. Think of the context of everything we said tonight, the setting of this story. Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town. Bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Sir, the servant said, what you have ordered has been done, but there's still room. Then the master told his servant, go out to the roads and the country lanes, the peasant farmers in this culture, working for the Roman Empire. Go out into the country and compel them to come in, so that my house will be what? I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my, what does that say? My banquet. Let's back up once again. What did we say it meant culturally when you ate with someone? Do you remember? This was your tribe. This was your people. These were the people you associated with. This was your social strata. A Pharisee was giving a lunch, so who would you assume he would have invited? Talk to me. All the other Pharisees. Jesus says when you give a lunch, invite the blind, the crippled, the lame, which in their culture would not have been unfortunate, but the worst sinners than yourself. Invite them, and then he tells a story like this. Think of the story for just a moment. There was a wealthy man. He invited guests to a banquet he wanted to hold. Who would he have invited? Who would that wealthy man have invited in that culture? His other wealthy friends. Those of his social strata. All of them have excuses. Some of them pretty lame, if you ask me. All of them give excuses. And once they give those excuses, the man gets, what emotion did we say? Angry. And he tells the servants to go out and invite who? The very ones, talk to me tonight, the very ones that these Pharisees view as morally inferior, as worse sinners than themselves, go out and invite them. The servant comes back and says, there's still room in the house. We've still got room. So what's the only thing this guy wants? This wealthy, rich banquet thrower. What's the only thing he wants? He just wants his house, what's the word? So he says, okay, fine, go out into the countryside and invite the peasant farmers even. Bring them in. Notice there are 3 bases for the invitation tonight. Number 1, the extravagance. of the one who's throwing the feast. How many of you agree with that? Say yes.
Yes.
Number 2, the abundance of his resources to feed that many people. You agree with that? Say yes.
Yes.
Number 3, the third basis for the invitation, and this is the part I really want to focus on as we begin this series on this person named Jesus. Speaking to these religious people of his own day who felt morally superior to others, Jesus said the real basis for the invitation is this guy just wanted his house what?
Full.
Notice what he does with the bar. He takes the bar and he continues to do what with it? Talk to me. Lower it and lower it and lower it again until finally what does he do with it? He abolishes the bar altogether and says, just go out and invite who? Anybody. Just go out and invite anybody. All I want, there are no conditions. All I want is my house to be, what does that say? Full. Now, process that for just a moment. I want to touch on one word here, though. Before we go any further, I want to touch on one word. It says to go out into the country lanes and, what is that word? Talk to me. Keep up with me. What does it say? Compel. I want to take just a moment to address this word because this has been probably the most abused parable in all of Christian history. Matter of fact, the first person to interpret compel in the way that I'm going to not define it, the way that I'm going to address it, was Augustine. Augustine looked at this word compel, and he said, oh, Christ told us to go out and compel people to come to the banquet. He didn't tell us how to compel people. So how did Augustine, anybody here know anything about Christian history, church history? Anybody here? Anybody here know anything about Christian church? Is there any Christians in the room that know anything about Christian church history? Okay, thank you. When Augustine interpreted this, what did he say could be used now to compel people to make a decision to come to the banquet? What did he start using to compel people? Talk to me. Force. And what do you mean by force? Let's be graphic. What did he do? He used the sword, absolutely. What else did he do? Really? Nobody here knows anything about Christian history? Church history? Really? How many here know that Christians burn Christians at the stake? Anybody know that? Okay, thank you. Yes, you know this. Speak up. They begin compelling people by force, even burning them at the stake, which is the most demonically ugly interpretation of this verse you could ever come to. The word compel, look at what it actually means. I put it in the gray section there. There's your Greek word. That's the original language that it was written in. It means not to what? Coerce, but to what? But to plead or to... It denotes humility. If we misunderstand this, though, Augustine took this, and that's when Christianity started burning heretics at the stake. Christianity would murder Muslims. They would murder witches. They would murder anyone. They would Jews. They would kill anyone who they thought theologically disagreed with them because they had a Christ-given mandate to compel. But how many of you see tonight that is a very sick understanding of what Jesus was actually saying in that parable? How many would agree with that? See, many people use church and Christian history to throw out the teachings of Jesus. How many have seen that in our culture today? But I am going to submit to you this evening that Christian history actually doesn't prove that Jesus' teachings are lacking. What Christian history shows us is that what Jesus taught was very difficult. And even Christians have failed to really follow what Jesus was really all about. Once again, what was the statement we began with by Gandhi? I like your who? Your Christ. I do not like your what? Why are your Christians so unlike your... This is one of the ways Christians have been very different than Christ. The word means beg. It denotes, once again, humility. Why would the poor and the blind and the lame, the people from the streets, the homeless, why would they, and the peasant farmers, why would they need to be begged to come to a feast like this? Process this with me for a moment. Why would they need to be begged? I would think if you invited them, given where they're at and given what's being offered to them, they'd just come running into this banquet. Why would they need to be begged? Remember, who you ate with was who you called your what? Your tribe. So if you're a very wealthy man and you're inviting this group, remember what was assumed about this group? These people were not just unfortunate, they were what? These were sinners. If you were on the receiving end of this invitation, what would have been your thought? What would have been your response? You want me to come to that? What would you have been wondering? Talk to me now. Put yourself in their sandals for just a moment. What would you have been wondering?
They're being set up.
Yeah, the setup, judgment. There's a trick. There's a catch. There's a catch. What's the catch? What? You going to make fun of me? Why do you want me to come to this feast? That's why the master implores the servants, if you have to, even beg them to come, because remember his motive is, I just want my house what? Full. Now we're going to have to understand some background to this as well. Take your handouts with me. This has been the God's agenda from the very beginning, I believe. In Isaiah 55, verse 1, "Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the," what does it say? "You who have no money, come buy and," what does it say? "Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost." This was the goal from the very beginning. God created the human race, and he invites them in on a, according to this story, on a what? Talk to me tonight. On a what? Are you here? What does he invite the human race in on? A banquet. Now, what happens is that we get the wrong idea. Were they going to get the wrong idea? The peasants, did they need to be compelled at times if they would think, was there suspect? Was there mistrust there? You have the fall of man in the Genesis narrative, and this is going to complicate things greatly. God now has to go to great lengths to try to win the human race back, to seeing him correctly and trusting him enough to come to this banquet. Remember, he just wants his house, what does it say? Full. Lowering the bar? No, abolishing the bar. I just want my house full. One of the ways the scriptures indicate, one of the methods that God chose to use was through creating the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, the Hebrews. He took these 12 sons from one man, and he said, I am going to use them to invite others to this banquet. And that is a long and very sad history in some of those ages. But when you look at it very clearly, notice their calling was not a calling to status, but a calling to a vocation. Say that with me, if you will. It was not a calling to, what word?
Status.
But a calling to a what?
Vocation.
What was the first word?
Status.
What was the second word?
Vocation.
First word again?
Status.
Second word?
Vocation.
You have those two words in your mind tonight. Hold them there for just a moment. What's the difference between a status and a vocation? Any ideas?
Oh.
Let me try to illustrate it for you. The Hebrew people came to see their calling not as a vocation. A vocation meant that they were to go out, and it was a job. They were to go out and simply invite others to the banquets. They took it, though, not as a vocation, but as a, what was that other word?
Status.
A status. What does that mean? The reason we are chosen, the reason we've been picked, so to speak, is because we have a certain, what's that word again?
Status.
Status. Notice how it worked. They began to look at the nations around them. If you read the Old Testament, they began to look at the nations around them, and they began to feel holier than the other nations around them. If you agree with that, say yes.
Yes.
They began to feel like they were more saved than the other nations around them. If you agree with that, say yes.
Yes.
They began to believe they had more truth than the other nations around them. If you agree with that, say yes.
Yes.
They began to believe that they were actually more favored than the other nations around them. If you agree with that, say yes too.
Yes, too.
Yes.
And they began to feel, based on this, morally superior to the other nations. They began to judge the other nations and began to actually look down on the nations that were around them. That is very different than a vocation. If you agree with that, say yes.
Yes.
They took their chosenness as a status symbol, not as a calling to do something. Well, God's very patient. How many are thankful for that tonight? That God's very patient, that He works with us where we're at. Take your hand out. God begins to work with Israel, trying to bring them from status to vocation. He actually makes many concessions. He meets them where they're at. The Old Testament is a long history of God lowering Himself and lowering the bar, meeting people where they're at and trying to bring them from where they're at to where He wants them to be. A good example of this is Exodus 21:10. Look at this, if you will, for a moment. If he marries another what? Woman, he must not deprive the what? The first one, her food, clothing, and marital rights. Some people take exception to this Old Testament God because they say he believed in, what do we call having more than one wife? He believed in polygamy. I want to ask you, is that God's ideal?
No.
Or is that a concession that He made in the Old Testament? Talk to me. And why would that be a concession? Well, think about it. You have a very patriarchal society driven by men. That's not the way God wanted it, but that's the kind of people He was having to work with. Now, in doing that, if you're not attached to a man, you don't have any property rights. You don't own anything. You have no way to gain an income. If you're not attached to a man, either a father or a husband, you're going to be poor and left out begging just to simply eat. If you see that, say yes.
Yes.
Now, what happens if you also live in a violent era? And many of the men get killed off through war, and you have more women now than you have men. What's the most loving thing to do? To say, no, one man, one wife, that's it, I don't care. Let the chips fall where they fall. Is that a very loving response, do you think, to make? Think about it for a moment. Talk to me. I know you're uncomfortable, but talk to me. If you're a Christian here, step out of your Christianness for just a second and just talk to me for just a moment. Would that be a very loving thing for God to do?
No.
No. No, not to say just one man, one woman, chips fall where they... Would that be loving? I don't care if it sends them into begging for food or prostitution or slavery. One man, one woman. Is God that really hard-nosed? See, let me try to illustrate this for you. This will help in the next 10 minutes, help you understand what I'm saying. God has an ideal will. How many would agree with that? God has an ideal will given a perfect situation. But we also find many times in the Scripture stuff like this, which I would submit to you is God's accommodating will. What does that mean? His accommodating will is what He wants given a non-ideal situation. Does that make sense? And so, out of compassion for these women that were in a patriarchal society, He permitted a man to have more than one wife. How many can see that from this text so far? How many can see that tonight? Is that God's ideal will, or is that one of His concessions? Is that one of His accommodations? Which one? Ideal or accommodating? Accommodating. Look at the next one. And even then, God is so patient. Even that wasn't working. So He lowers the bar again and even allows, what else did He allow? Not just more than one wife. What else did He allow? Talk to me, those of you who know anything about the Old Testament narrative.
Concubines.
What did He allow?
Mistresses and concubines.
Talk to me, not just more than one wife. What did He allow? I know you're here. Talk to me.
Concubines.
Concubines, yes. Yes. How many can see that as lowering the bar one more time and just working with people where they're at in non-ideal situations? How many can see that reality there? Now let's look at it again. Exodus 29, 23, 29, and 30. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, that the land may not become desolate, and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. I will drive them out before you little by little until you become fruitful and take possession of the land. The background of this verse is that God was bringing Israel out of Egyptian slavery, and he said, when you come up to these Canaanite nations, you're not going to need to fight them yourself. How many can see that in this verse? If you see that, say yes.
Yes.
Matter of fact, it says, I will drive them out little by little. Think about that. Is that genocide? Talk to me. Is that wipe them all out? What would we call this? This isn't annihilation. This is relocation. Do you see what's happening here? This was God's original plan. And it wasn't even the Israelites that were going to do it. A lot of people look at the Old Testament God and they have a hard time with all the violence. Is there anyone here besides me that has a very hard time with the violence in the Old Testament? You look at some of those genocide stories and you say, how can that be a good God? I don't know what happened from Exodus 23 to when you get to the book of Joshua. Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't know what happened during that time frame. But I know according to Exodus, God's ideal was not violent. Are you hearing what I'm saying? It was a relocation. Something happened. And when we look at that, even the violence of the Old Testament, we have to label that as not God's ideal, not what he wants. It's just like polygamy. Are you hearing what I'm saying? That's not, it might, and I don't know what would have happened to make that the lesser of two evils. But sometimes what God has to choose is not the difference between right and wrong, but the lesser of two wrongs. Are you hearing that tonight? Polygamy, would you say that's right or wrong? But did God permit it?
Yes.
Why? Because was it a lesser wrong than women being out on the street begging and forced into even prostitution? Would that be a worse wrong? Are you hearing what I'm saying tonight? This is important because it's going to make this parable and this luncheon at the Pharisees' house incredibly significant to you in just a moment. Look at another one. 1 Samuel 8:22. The Lord answered, just talking to Samuel, listen to them and give them a what? A king. Was that God's ideal? Or was that a concession? Was that in meeting them on their demands where they were at? The nationalism that you see in the Old Testament is not God's ideal. How many can see that tonight? How many are thankful for that? That God is a God of all nations, not just one. How many can see that tonight? But you have intense nationalism in the Old Testament. And some people have turned off from the Old Testament God by that. Look at Leviticus 18, 7 and verse 23. And this is the clincher. This is the whole point. Do not dishonor your father by having, and this is for the public, so just forgive the raciness of this, but it says by having sexual relations with your mother. Here's my question. What kind of people is God working with that this has to be a rule? Are you hearing what I'm saying? Do you need a rule that tells you not to have sex with your mom? Do you need that put down in legal writing? Do you need that? Talk to me. Do you need that? I'm hoping you will say no a lot louder than what you're saying right now. Do you need that as a law?
No.
What kind of people would? Are you hearing me? See, some people say we see God in those laws. No, I don't think that's true. I think what we see in some of these laws is the kind of people God was having to work with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It goes on, and man, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but it says don't even have sexual relations with, and what does that say? What kind of people have to have that a law? Not to have sex with animals. I think all of this makes very clear that in the Old Testament, God was trying to meet them very patiently, meet this nation where it was at, and bring them from where they were at to something very different. But he had to work with them where they were at all along the way. If you can see that principle so far, it's very important, foundational, but if you can see that first principle so far tonight, say yes.
Yes.
Now what happens if you don't make this distinction? And you begin to start looking at those accommodations and concessions. And you start interpreting those as God's ideal. What happens? You get a very sick picture of God, number one. But you get a very sick people, number two. It is amazing to me that where I'm from, the Confederates of the South, and I can say that because I am from there, used the concessions of God in the Old Testament toward slavery as somehow justification to enslave millions of African Americans in the middle 19th century. How many can see that is a gross abuse of taking a concession in the Old Testament and interpreting it into an ideal, something that's acceptable? Do you see what's happening here? Now, this is what happens. God continues to see that they're messed up. He sends prophets to them, trying to bring them from the concessions to the ideal, trying to take them from where they're at to where they need to be. And how does Israel treat the prophets?
Kill them.
Anybody know Old Testament history, a little bit of it?
Kill them.
Kills them, stones them, persecutes them. He sends one, they kill him. He sends another, they kill him. He sends another, they kill him. And finally, I can imagine God up in heaven saying, I'm done. I've had it. If you want something done right, you have to do it, what does he say? Yourself. And so what does God do? He comes himself in the person of who? Jesus. But when Jesus shows up, notice, is Jesus the concessions or the ideal?
Ideal.
See, what we find in Jesus is that God is not a nationalistic God. He's a God of all people. If you're thankful for that, say yes.
Yes.
What we see is that God is not a God of all the endless rules of the Old Testament. He's a God of extravagant grace towards those that have fallen. If you agree with that tonight, say yes.
Yes.
He's not a God of violence. That's the concession. He's a God. What we see in Jesus is that he's a God who, when push comes to shove, says, love your what? Enemies. Turn the other cheek. He's a God that doesn't demand the death of his enemies, but rather would die in their place instead. See, take all the concessions, strip all the accommodations away, and what you get is a God that looks like who?
Jesus.
Like Jesus. How many can see tonight a little bit of why there's a difference between the Old Testament God and Jesus? How many can see why there's a little bit of a difference there? But what happens if you have an entire nation founded on and invested in all the concessions? When the ideal shows up, what are you going to do to it? Is it going to be in harmony with the concessions? Or is it going to be very different than the concessions? And so what are you going to do? And this is the key. This is the point of this whole parable that Jesus is teaching here. The first people that were invited, Jesus shows up as the final vehicle of inviting them, even themselves, to enter in on this banquet. But they're so invested in the concessions. The religious people of Jesus' day were so invested in the concessions that when the ideal showed up, what did they do? Talk to me. What did they do? Talk to me. What did they do? They killed him. And you know what's ironic? The very people that accepted Jesus and that embraced Jesus, who were they? They were the prostitutes and the tax collectors. Those who didn't fit in to the religious agenda of Jesus' day. The ones who were morally inferior by their standards. Does that make sense? The ones who were marginalized by their society. The ones who felt like they weren't on the inside. The ones who were judged as being of lesser worth and outsiders. Those are the ones who actually caught hold of what Jesus was actually teaching. And they embraced it. They're the last person to judge. Why? Why would they be the last people to judge? Because they would know what it felt like to be what?
Rejected.
They would be the last people to oppress others. Because they themselves knew what it felt like to be what?
Rejected.
They would be the last people to tread on others. Because they know what it felt like too intimately to be tread on. With all of this in mind, does it make sense, Gandhi's statement in the beginning tonight? I like your,
Christ.
but I don't like your what?
Christian.
How does this apply to us today? Jesus embraced the tribe of the outcast. He was crucified between two what? It's as if he was stretching out his arms saying, these are my people. These are my tribe. The ones that I originally invited, did they, in the story, did they accept the invitation? Did they go in? The original invitees.
No.
And so where did the great banquet, the rich man, the one throwing the banquet, who did he turn to? Remember, the people in the streets and the peasant farmers. And when he invited them in, what was he saying virtually? I'm changing my tribe. I'm changing my people. I am going to feast with these now. As Jesus hung upon a cross, he looked at the religious people of his own day, and he chose to embrace thieves, prostitutes, tax collectors, the marginalized, and the sinners. How many think that is a beautiful picture of God? What does this mean for us today? We're going to take a brief intermission in a few moments. Before we get there are two ways that I think this is applicable. Number one, there's a warning in it. Because I'm pretty sure there are some of you here tonight who, just by the title of this series, the Jesus Dialogue, and I'll explain to you more in the next presentation why we're calling it this. There are some of you here tonight that are pretty sure, like those Pharisees, you're pretty sure you're on the inside. You don't know about anyone else, but you're pretty sure you are. And I want you to think, why did the Pharisees feel like they were on the inside? They weren't just the doers of the law. They were the guardians of the law. Does that make sense? The teachers of it. They were wealthy. What does that mean? Remember, if the poor were sinners, the wealthy were what?
Righteous.
God must show favor on them. They were healthy, so that put them in a great light. They were Jews. They were part of the right nation. They had all these bases for feeling like they were on the inside of the invitation. Are you with me so far? I'm assuming, once again, that there's some of you here tonight that are also pretty sure you're on the inside of that invitation, that you're an insider. And I don't want to call into question assurance. I don't think we should be, hear what I'm saying, hear very clearly, don't misunderstand me. I don't think we should go around in anxiety about our standing with God. How many agree with that tonight? But understand this, my question is tonight, what are you basing that assurance on? Is it the abundance of resources? Is it the ability to feed everyone? Is your assurance based on the fact that he just wants his house full? Are you hearing what I'm saying tonight? Or is your basis on things like, well, I believe there's a God. I even believe in Jesus. I believe the right doctrines. Oh, I believe in the Bible. I go to church. I pray a lot. Do you understand what I'm saying tonight? What is the basis of your assurance? Is it on all these things that are true about you that you do? Or is it on the fact that he just wants his house full? If you see a difference between those two bases so far, say yes.
Yes.
The challenge for me is that most of us, the basis of our assurance is in the wrong place. Christians today, and praise God for the few exceptions, I know this is a stereotype, but Christians today largely, I think, have made the same mistake that Israel did of old. We have viewed our chosenness today not as a vocation, but as a what?
Status.
Status. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? Well, think about it. Do we feel like we're more blessed than other people? Be honest. Do Christians today feel like they're more blessed than other people? Talk to me. Talk to me. Do they? Some of them. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. America is a blessed. Now, I'm not from Canada. I'm from the States. But America is a blessed nation. More blessed than, what do they say? Talk to me, Canadians. You should be offended by this. What do they say? More blessed than any other nation. And why is that? No, yeah, that's true. But why do they say that? Because God must be having what? Favor on us. How many have heard that coming out of the United States before? How many have heard that paradigm before? Christians today are feeling as if they are more blessed than other people. Did Israel feel like they were more blessed than other people?
Yeah.
Yes. Look at it again. Did they feel, do Christians today feel like, and I know this is touchy, but did they feel holier than other people? Be honest. Did Israel of old feel holier than the other nations?
Yeah.
Interesting. Do Christians today feel more saved than other people?
Yeah.
Interesting. Do Christians today feel like they have more truth than other people? I know this is rubbing some of you guys. That's okay. Do Christians today feel morally superior to other people? Talk to me. Do they? Praise God for the few exceptions. Be honest. Do Christians today feel more superior?
Yes.
Morally superior
Yes.
to other people? Do Christians today look down? Are Christians guilty of looking down on others and judging others
Yes.
and disdaining others? I don't know what it's like here in Canada. I can only speak as someone who's from the United States. But all you have to do to prove this is mention two scenarios, two groups of people in the States. Someone who's contemplating getting an abortion, or someone who is gay. And in that moment, does it become clear that Christians feel morally superior to others? That we disdain others? That we judge others and look down on others? Have we been guilty of that?
Yes.
We have to let this parable confront us, because I'm afraid and I'm fearful that we're repeating some of that same history. You see, the idea that Christianity, or to be a Christian or to follow Jesus, the idea that that doesn't mean you're better than anyone else is quickly being lost, if not wholly obliterated. We take it as a status. If you're a follower of Jesus, you have a status now. And you do. There's a tendency at times, and once again, praise God for the few exceptions. But the people that don't want to have anything to do with this guy right here, largely don't want to have anything to do with him because there's a Christian somewhere who felt like because they were following this guy, it made them better than them. Am I making that up, or is there anyone else that's ever bumped into that before? Does that exist? Be honest.
Yes.
The stats are in. We've got all of our reasons for confidence. How many read the book, though, Unchristian? How many read that book? How many know the Barna Group? How many have ever heard of the Barna Group? I want to encourage you to pick up the book. You can get it from Barnes & Noble or from, do you guys have Barnes & Noble up here? No, what do you have? What's that, pages? Is that what it's called? Chapters, that's what it is. Sorry. Chapters. Yeah, go to Chapters, get the book Unchristian, or Amazon.com, you can get the book Unchristian. The stats are in. Here's the way it looks, okay? When it comes to violence, Christians are, would you say, more prone to violence or less prone to violence than non-Christians? Talk to me. Which would you say? And I'm not giving you an opinion. I'm going to share with you what the stats are, what the research shows. Not the same.
Should be less.
Should be less, that's true. The stats show that we are actually more prone to violence than non-Christians. Matter of fact, and once again, I don't know what it's like up here in Canada, but where I'm from, when America goes to war, do you know who the biggest cheerleaders are down there? Do you know who the biggest cheerleaders are down there?
Christian.
The Christians. I'm sorry. Yeah, forget loving your enemies. We're going to stand by America and we're going to wipe the planet free of them. I'm sorry, to me that doesn't look like Jesus. Is there anyone else here that feels that way? It just doesn't look like Jesus. When it comes to greed, once again, I don't know what it's like up here. But the stats are in. This one we are equal. We are just as prone to greed as non-Christians. When it comes to gluttony, we are just as prone to gluttony as non-Christians. When it comes to self-righteousness, actually, that's one of those ones, again, where Christians kind of exceed the scale. That Christians are more prone to self-righteousness than non-Christians. And divorce, and I know this is touchy. Listen, I grew up, my mother was divorced 3 times. My mother was divorced 4 times. My dad was divorced 3. If you're divorced here tonight, this isn't about you. I don't want you to feel any guilt over this. It's not a guilt thing. It's a statistics thing. God himself is divorced. Do you understand what I'm saying? And remarried. He was married to who?
Israel.
He was married to who?
Israel.
He was married to who? Yeah, to Israel. But now he's married to the... So even God's divorced and remarried. Do you realize that? Do you realize that? So this isn't a guilt thing. What I want you to understand is the statistics. Christians today, when the research comes back, Christians now have a higher rate of divorce even than unchristians. And I only bring that up so that you can see how incredibly hypocritical it is that we would think we're the ones that know what God's like. We're the ones that stand for truth and justice. We're the ones that are going to rid the world of evil. We're the ones that are going to cheer when nations go to war. We're the ones that's going to take, I don't know what they say up here, but I know what they say down there, we're going to take America back for God. I have a hard time with even that phrase. What do you mean, take America back for God? What does that look like? I mean, back. Could someone please show me the glory days where the United States looked like Jesus? When was that? Was that when we were taking land from the Native Americans? Is that when we looked like Jesus? When was that? Was that when we were enslaving millions of African Americans? Is that when we looked like Jesus? What do you mean, take America back for God? And we throw out our picket signs and we say, we're going to save marriage down there. Not from our divorce rate. No, we're going to save it from those gay people. And I'm sorry, but the rest of the world is looking at the statistics and looking at reality and looking at, praise God for the few exceptions, looking at Christians' arrogance and just saying, you have got to be kidding me. You guys are going to be the ones that fix society? You can't even fix yourself. And I know those words are a little harsh because some of us look at Christianity from within it. But I'm asking you to look at Christianity tonight from outside of it. How many can see that's the way Christianity is looking to the culture at large today? How many are concerned by that? Be honest. How many are concerned? That's why in this series, it is not my passion at all to defend Christianity. When someone asks me today if I'm a Christian, I have to be very honest. I tell them, no, I'm not a Christian. What Christianity has come to be associated with, I don't want to have anything to do with. But I am a follower of Jesus. Let me tell you what that's about. How many see light in that? How many think there's hope in that? It's not, and that's why I said at the beginning, it's not about a religion. It's about a what? A person. I want you to understand if you're visiting here tonight, I'm not going to make excuses for Christianity. I'm not going to argue with you about how horrible Christianity is. If you come up to me in this series at some of our break times and you try to tell me how bad Christians and Christianity throughout history has been, I guarantee you, whatever you tell me that is bad, I can outdo it. Are you with me? I'm on the same page as you. I get it. I'm not inviting you to be a Christian. I just want us to take an honest look at the person of Jesus. Look at what he taught and see if that's worth following. There's a difference in those two. Tonight, the second point we have to look at is the punchline of the parable. At the very end, what did Jesus close with? What did Jesus close with? What was the last line? I tell you, none of those who were what? Will get a taste of my, what does it say? Here's the irony of it all. The very ones who were so arrogantly assured, so smugly judging this guy that was healed and Jesus for healing him, these ones sitting around this table so sure they're on the inside, they're actually on the what? The outside. And the guy they just judged and felt morally superior to, he's just taken the first bite of the banquet feast. That's the irony of it all. Tonight, this is the second thing we have to allow to confront us. If you have felt like an outsider when it comes to Christianity or to religion, if you felt like you never played the religious game very well, if you felt like you just didn't fit in, that you weren't like that, this parable is whispering to you that you may be more on the inside than you assume. You say, but Herb, I've committed a murder. I've committed abortion. I've had an abortion. I've had an affair. I've committed adultery. Drug abuse. I've wasted years of my life in drug abuse. All that stuff may be true. And you may have set in motion things that it's going to take God some time to bring back around and to fix. Society may even have to put you away for a little while. I get all that. What you have to realize, though, on top of all of that, is that none of that puts you on the outside of the invitation. He just wants his house. What did he say?
Full.
Full. We have to realize that there's hope for those who have felt marginalized by Christianity. How many are thankful for that tonight? Those who are so sure that they're on the inside, I'm asking you to reevaluate why you think you're on the inside. And those who feel like you're on the outside, I'm asking you to reevaluate that too. Ask yourself why you think you're that way. And then look at the person of Jesus. We have to let it confront us because the Pharisees, they had a kind of holiness that repelled sinners. Sinners, prostitutes, and tax collectors steered clear of the Pharisees for fear of being judged. Do you agree with that? Say yes.
Yes.
Jesus had a kind of holiness that actually attracted sinners. We have to ask the question, and once again, praise God for the few exceptions. But where are the tax collectors and the prostitutes today? Are they sitting beside you in church? Are they being attracted to us because of our radical, other-centered love, humble servant love? Or are they steering clear of us for fear of being judged? That's got to force on us the conclusion that to a large degree, Christianity today has imbibed more, unintentionally but nonetheless, imbibed more the spirit of the Pharisees than we have the spirit of Jesus. Jesus is asking all of us, whether you think you're on the inside or the outside, just to stop for a minute and see what it actually was that he taught. He taught things like looking at other people's sin as less than your own. It's a speck of dust compared to the 2x4 in your own eye. If just a handful of Christians would do that, can you imagine if just a handful of Christians would feel like the gay and lesbian community's sin is of less consequence than their own. If they would just have the humility to look at their own sin as worse. And I know some of you are concerned right now. I'm not legitimizing it. I'm not minimizing it. All I'm saying is this. You know how many times homosexuality is mentioned in the Bible? Do you know how many times it's mentioned? Anybody know? Anybody know? It's mentioned 6 times. 6 times. Do you know how many times helping the poor is mentioned? 3,000 times. Why are we so focused on making them change when greed and commercialism and all that, we're happy to live with those. Are you with me? It's always someone else's sin that's the deal breaker. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's not ours. It's someone else's. I know some of the things that if you're a Christian tonight, some of the things I've said are challenging to you. If you're very invested in it tonight, you're probably pretty mad at me right now. And I want you to know that's okay. I love you. Okay? If those of you who are not assured that you're on the inside, I want to invite you just to press in closer during these next few nights. See what it was that Jesus actually taught. And don't allow Christians or Christianity, don't allow a religion to turn you away from a person. We're going to break now for about 15 minutes. And we're going to come back with a little bit of not an intellectual presentation, it's more on a relational level, but we're going to be looking at just some reasons why I think that Jesus is actually even true. How many have ever wrestled with that before? Let me just see a raise of hands. Why I think that Jesus is even the story is true, that Jesus is who he said he was, who the disciples said he was. We're going to start with all of the basics that everybody agrees on. And we're just going to traverse all of the options in the little time that we have left this evening very quickly and very efficiently. We're going to just trace through all of the options. When we get to the end, you may be a little surprised the conclusions we come to. But we're going to be looking at the next title of the presentation, why I think this is true. Why I think any of this is true. Why even take the time to even look at the person of Jesus. We'll begin there. Thank you for coming. I'm going to turn the time over back to Honey right now. She's going to explain to you how the intermission is going to work with the refreshments and all of that. And thank you for coming tonight. Give yourselves a hand. Thank you for coming out.